Hey, welcome to another episode of Jack Theology. My name is Matt, and I'm joined by Kevin Young. Kevin and I have an interest in discussing different Jack theologies out there and even our own Jack theology. And we also like to get jacked. So I thought we'd start today just talking about where we're at and getting our bodies jacked and healthy. So, Kevin, what have you been up to lately?
Yeah, I have. I've actually been deloading a little bit over the summer. I went a little too heavy, and I over exceeded my capacity, and so I had a little arm injury and a little neck deal. So have been deloading, and it's so hard to do to like lower that bar because you're like, man, I know I can lift more than this, but it's
Yeah.
good. It's also nice to it's also nice to be able to do a full range of motion as well. So yeah, that's where I am.
Cool. Yeah, I started back up at our CrossFit gym, local CrossFit box, get my cardio back up. But I noticed I did a lot of bodybuilding, powerlifting over the last year, and got a lot stronger. But I had that moment yesterday, so we were doing our strength portion, and I was doing pretty well. Like I had outlifted everybody in my class pretty significantly, but I knew that I had to get to a certain number to be number one for the whole gym. And so I did the lift before that lift, and we were doing strict press, 3 reps, and I did 145, and 160 is where I needed to get to. So it's like I'll do 145, and then I'll do tens on each side and crush everybody. And so I did the 145, and on the third rep, I felt a little tweak in the shoulder. It felt good going up. Like I could have gone to 160, but I thought about that, Kevin. I was like, you know what? Winning my class today, I'll just stop there. I do not want to not be able to lift, and work out the rest of the next couple of weeks. So I listened to my old man, Birdie, on this shoulder, not the young man Birdie on the other shoulder. But I did have a little battle there. So
Yeah, one of the things you learn, I guess, is when the when enough is enough. Uh, I wish, I wish, in the realm of theology, people would learn that as well. When enough is enough. You know, when to just stop, cut your losses, and move on.
yeah, yeah. Some people dig themselves a hole for sure. Uh, yeah, we've all been there, not only in
Yeah.
fitness and but in discussions. Yeah,
No,
so
yeah,
there's
and
been a lot.
we've seen a lot of that the last week, haven't we, in
Yeah,
theology?
yeah. I was gonna say there's been a lot going on with that. Um, Maybe people speaking too much or too little. So a few things this week we could dive into that people have been talking about. We've been talking about. I think we want to maybe try to hit on both of those things. One would be the whole Matt Chandler, um, stepping down for inappropriate, frequent, and uh, familiar text with a woman who is not his spouse. So
Yeah, but what I mean, they didn't even. It was a whole bunch of nothing burger in what they told us, at least. Like completely opened up a can of worms, but said you can't see inside. It was like, what were they
yeah,
thinking?
I mean, on the
We
surface,
have these texts. There's nothing wrong with any of these texts, but you're still going on a leave of absence. Like
yeah.
it didn't it didn't pass the smell test.
No, I think especially for those of us that have led in churches and been a part of those deals, we kind of it's almost like they're playing us as idiots. But I will tell you that I talked to a few folks that aren't in leadership and ministry, never have been, just lay worshipers who and know who Matt Chandler is and have been following along. And it's interesting to hear their perspective. They actually are buying a lot of what is being sold by the Village Church, which I found fascinating.
How so? What they believe what?
Uh, they believe at the surface that they're just holding Matt to a higher standard than 99.9% of the world that he just was he shouldn't have been texting a woman that wasn't his wife, and that, what we see on the surface is what they think actually happened. Whereas the conversations I've had and I think this is true, and there's been some talk on the Twitterverse about this, and I agree, like that. Well, should that actually be a punishable offense, just being friends with another woman that's not your wife?
Yeah,
And
no,
and
I think you make a really good point. Matt Chandler is obviously a pastor of a very large and influential church and network, the Acts 29 Church Planting Network in Flower Mound, Denton, Texas, outside of Dallas, and obviously some texts, situation that had gone on. That's about all that we know. With some other woman who wasn't his wife. The story is his wife knew what was going on, and her husband knew what was going on, but he still gets a leave of absence and is getting dragged through the mud in the court of public opinion. And this is a 101 course in how not to handle a situation like this publicly, because by not telling anything other than Matt didn't do anything wrong, somebody is in the fault here. Either they are lying to us about what was actually in the text and how bad it was, or Matt really was overpunished for what he was, for what actually
yeah,
happened in my opinion. But somebody here is in the wrong. And it's fascinating that the sounds like the church folks that you are connected to think Matt's in the wrong. They automatically jump to it was an abuse situation where Matt took advantage of somebody. But the people who aren't connected to church um, think
yeah,
that he
church
should
leadership.
be.
I think church leaders, those of us that have been down this road, maybe even written statements, we kind of know that there's more going on. We kind of assume that there's more going on. I guess we don't know for sure, but yeah, those that are just to attend church regularly, who haven't been part of those conversations over the years, see it a little differently. Um, so I think, why, where I'm stuck is why take him through this public shaming, and they knew that this would happen. Like, they're not dumb. They know the influence they have. They know the following that they have. And so I'm taking this step of making him go on stage and take a leave of absence and all these things. Like, if it was just like a friendly text that, he texted this woman a lot, and they don't want him to do that, then you could handle that behind closed doors and kind of move on. Give him a month vacation to go whatever, deal with it, and however they want them to deal with it, or put them through a personal improvement plan as they use in the corporate world. But the public nature of this, like, leads me strongly to believe that, and the fact that they won't release the text messages, like, well, if it's nothing, then show us that it's nothing. I think would be simple, and their excuse to that is, well, we got to protect the woman. Well, we all have black Sharpies. We've seen it a lot lately with the Trump stuff going on, right? Like, it's not that hard.
Little bit of redaction going on.
Not that hard to do. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, the problem, toxic theologies. How much of this situation is driven by, and you hinted at this, how much of this is driven by the theology of how so many Christian theologies relate to women and the relationship between women and men. There's a lot of talk about the Billy Graham rule. The man should never be alone with another woman in any situation that's not his wife. Especially if you're a pastor. And there are a lot of people on both sides of that argument. But where you fall on the relationship between women and men theologically determines a lot about how you handle this. And so maybe you're right, because there is such a hard line in the theologies of Matt's stream about women and men and their roles and what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate. Maybe it was a lot of nothing sauce. But to them and their theology, it was a big deal. I don't know. I mean, how do you think the theologies play into all of this?
Yeah, I think it definitely plays into it. they, I don't know what to necessarily believe, but yes, the Billy Graham rule, I think, is coming into play here. And I had some conversations with some women who used to serve with me on staff, um, in a kind of a ministry lead kind of role. Like they were heading up different ministries. It wasn't like, office staff or things, but and compared to men. So like there was guys that I would take out to lunch because I was allowed to do that and talk about their ministry role, talk about their leadership. Whereas with women, that I have to meet with them more of in a general like staff type environment. I couldn't take them out for coffee. I couldn't take them out for lunch. And so I asked them recently, because of this Chandler thing, like if they felt left out, if they felt like they were second class citizens, and unequivocally they said yes. And so I
Wow.
think in corporate world and in other non-world, non-church world, church worlds that don't have this kind of theology, it's pretty normal for a platonic relationship between a man and a woman outside of their spousal relationship to have collegial conversations around their work. It's pretty normative. And so I think that the theology definitely plays into this, probably raise the spidey senses more. And honestly, probably speculating here, but probably because Matt didn't feel like he could be open and honest about having a friendship with someone, maybe probably would drive you when you're in the darkness and things are in the dark, stay and do things that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise, had that been able to be a more open, honest relationship in public eye. I've seen that. I've served on boards in this kind of world where guys have failed morally. And I think the secrecy, knowing that they can't like have a friendship out in public with someone of the opposite sex, has kind of like led to acting and kind of over sexualizing the relationship, because it's like, well, you can't be friends with that person because if you do, then you might have sex with them. And then in the end, that's what ends up happening with some folks. And so I think it is a problem. We over sexualize relationships between the opposite sex. And somebody brought up this point too, is another point, like, well, would Matt be being punished if he had these same conversations with a man? Why does it have to be just a woman, right? Like, could we so throw out the in this evangelical world the homosexuality like stuff, that, well, if we're going to oversensitize to sexuality with a man and woman, why don't we do the same with men to men? Why is it?
Yeah, there seems to be a double standard, and as you say, there is an objectification of women where they are objects um, of lust for men. I think is the kind of mental image that's portrayed in the evangelical church, and that men have a complete and utter inability to be friends with the opposite sex, that they're just lust driven maniacs. And you're right, there's also a double standard over the relationships with women and the relationships with men, which, as you say, doesn't even begin to get into the whole thing that the world isn't binary necessarily. Not everybody is on 100% opposite sides of this but spectrum.
Yeah. And then I want to talk about the announcement some too.
It was
yeah.
I'm trying to think of a word that won't get censored to use for it. It was awful. It was self-serving. It was maddening. Maybe you walked away with a totally different perspective on the announcement, but like, it's a 101 course in how not to go public with a situation like that from beginning to end.
It was so awful. It's like, it's the old in Acts 29. Like, I was part of that. Full disclosure, I was part of Acts 29. I was part of that culture. I met Matt. I know you worked with Matt on multiplications, but
yeah, we were on the same staff for a while.
Yeah, and so I had situations like this where I had to address staff discipline issues and I had to address the things publicly. And so I got advice from at my Acts 29 leaders, and what they did is what they told me to do. So they're the culture of Acts 29 and how to handle these sorts of things, we saw very much on display with this announcement. And I remember as a young pastor getting this advice, and I did it their way once, and just the vagueness and not addressing all the details. And it just completely backfired like it is now for them. Um, and I just remember thinking, I'm never doing it that way again. Like, why do we feel like we have to hide? Like, shouldn't we posture ourselves? And so, what they told me when I pushed back on this was, well, we have to protect the organization. And so, it's always organization above people. And I didn't like that. I was like, we're the church, we're a family. We should talk as a family would talk. We should have honest and open, authentic communications. And so I think the vagueness of church announcements like this really bother me. It also so and so is has chosen to leave. That kind of stuff too. It's when really so and so has not chosen to leave. We've asked them to leave. Like um, those kind of things rub me the wrong way because then we're inauthentic. We are in some sense lying to people, and then and people see right through it. Like people are not idiots, and so we
Yeah.
think they
No,
are.
I think you hit right there on one of the biggest problems in this situation and in the church today. Uh, it, the organization is seen as being a person and being the most important person to protect. Uh, and so everything is on the table and everything is okay in order to protect the organization because the organization does good. The organization is God ordained. The organization uh, can't fail because the gates of hell or whatever shall not prevail against the organization. And so it doesn't matter who gets hurt or what gets said, as long as at the end of the day the organization comes out on top. And it's not only bad theology. I think it's bad humanity. It's wrong.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
culture, I think, now sees that in the broader world and also in the church.
yeah. And then never have the guy being punished speak at his punishment announcement. um, we've seen this multiple times. Um, Recently, I forget the gentleman. I think he was in Texas. Made an announcement about stepping away because of sexual promiscuity, and he gets a standing ovation. And then, of course, Matt Chandler does the same thing. It's a standing ovation, and in all the cases I've ever seen, there's no remorse. Right? There was no remorse from Chandler. I mean, he's trying to explain it away like I really did nothing wrong. If you're not a believer, you'd be like, "What the heck is he?" I think he even said, "What the H uh, is this?" So I,
Yeah,
I
no, I'm
think,
sorry. No repentance, no remorse. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm going to be your pastor for the next 20 years. Um,
it was defiant.
a
Yeah,
a line in the sand. Yeah, defiance. A victim in a way
yeah, victim.
mentality. He
Yeah,
said, in a way, he said, if I remember correctly, the elders were right in what they did, but I don't recall him ever saying I was wrong in what I did.
no,
Maybe he hinted at it, but
he said I got to go deal with whatever that is. Like you can't repent of something you're not even willing to like say what it is, like what I did.
well, let's be honest. This all happened what, like February, like last year. Like we're like at least 6 months in from the moment where it was brought to his attention by the other party. If you don't know what it is after 6 months, after 8 months, after 9 months, it's not because you haven't had enough time. It's because there's something inside of you that isn't facing whatever's going on, truthfully.
Yeah, yeah, complete denial, and they shouldn't have put him through that because so now you got, and we've done it. We're doing it now, like Twitter world evaluating it, and not seeing it as a good thing. And so I think that was a poor decision on their part, to have him up there for that announcement. If he wanted to release a statement, written statement that got vetted, that might have been a different story. But yeah, um,
That's manipulation.
yeah, total
It's it's
manipulation.
it's manipulation of the story, and it's manipulation of the congregation. Um, Frankly, and intentionally or not, it is what it is. You know,
Yeah,
it was intended to manipulate. It was intended to manipulate the situation, and the feelings of the people who were in the room, and it succeeded for many, I think, of their constituency, but not the rest of the world. And I think they were surprised by that.
yeah, they limited access to the
They
video.
pulled the clip down, right?
Yeah, well, they pulled it so you can't share it on your own site. It can only be watched through their site. So people, writing blogs and articles, when they link the video, it wouldn't show up for them.
And why?
Yeah, and it happened after the fact, like, so.
Yeah, you know, I've gone through several crisis communication situations. The first question, if Matt was working with somebody who goes through crisis communication situations, the first question they would have asked Matt was, we need to know before we make any decisions about how to handle this. Did you do anything moral, illegal, immoral, illegal, or unethical? You know, we can get you through any of this, but did you do anything immoral, illegal, or unethical? And I think on the basis of how Matt responded and how the church responded so badly to this, the answer to one or more of those was yes. There was something immoral, illegal, and unethical that went on. We don't know what it was or whether it really was, but they felt as though it was. But unfortunately, because the answer to one of those was apparently yes in their minds, they did not appropriately handle it in the way that you appropriately handle it when the answer to one of those things was yes. If the answer to all three of those things was no, they would have handled it in a certain way. And if the answer is yes, they would have handled it in a certain way. But there something went on somewhere in their
Yeah,
minds. And rather than face it and deal with it, I think they chose the easy way out, and it shows.
yeah, it's clear. Uh, yeah, it's clear to a lot of people that there's something else going on, something we don't know. They don't want us to know, but in the end, hopefully that he gets help he needs.
Yeah,
He
and I
gets.
think that's probably the to me, Matt, that's the saddest part is whatever woman or women, you know, I think who are the other women in this, even if nothing went on, the shame and the guilt and being run through all of this, even anonymously, the weight of that has to be the worst. Second only to that, I think Matt knows what went on, and Matt knows the truth of this, and that if whatever went on is the only thing, or if there's more. And my sense is, and I know you deal with a lot of people who walk through heavy things and guilt and shame and sin and things that they've done wrong, and how they respond to it really tells where their heart is and whether or not there's more. Matt uniquely responded very badly publicly to this, which the world sees that there is implication of truth somewhere in here, of the worst case scenario, and that there's probably more.
Yeah,
Matt knows the truth, but the way Matt handled it, um, just said to everybody, whether it's truthful or not, what it communicated to everybody was, "There's more, and I'm not being transparent here."
well,
And
yeah, I
that's sad. That's sad for the church. That's sad for he and his
yeah,
family. That's sad for all involved. Frankly, they should have kept their mouths shut until they could do it well, or where Matt was in a place, I think, where it wasn't all about him.
yeah. You and I haven't done this as much as some others, but I've done it more than a couple. I've served on committees in our denomination where pastors are dealing with sexual sin, and they only everyone I've been on, and talking with others who've been on more, and then reading about Baj, I forget how you say their last name.
Division.
Yeah. Um, it's true. It's like the first thing they confess is what they got caught with. And honestly, Matt's confession looked identical to the ones I've seen as the first confession. It's just this denial. I'm not going to really truly repent and confess because I didn't do a lot wrong. I just did this little thing, and it's not that bad. And that's typically what I've seen. And then you work with him over time, and and the hard part is like as pastors, pastoral leaders, and I know this for Matt, like, and this is where I feel for him as a like, and why our culture in pastoring in church is so messed up is like he knows if he's truly honest with everything, his whole kingdom he's built comes crumbling down. His family is going to suffer. His financial kingdom is done. For his wife can't have all the nice things she has. His lifestyle is gonna change dramatically. And so this is, I think, the war that a lot of pastors deal with is like, all right, I'm just gonna own this and get through it, and then I hopefully save my career and my job. Um,
Yeah. No,
and
and this is where our
eventually,
theologies
yeah,
matter. This is where our
yeah,
theologies matter about relationships and sex and purity and boundaries. And there is zero tolerance within much of our theologies for not crossing the line, obviously, not even getting close to the line, but not even being perceived. It just whenever your theology is so puritanical about relationships, not just pastors, but about anybody in any relationships, which I think the Billy Graham rule ends up in a lot of ways being a puritanical
yeah.
model.
It
Um,
sets people up
you
for
just
failure.
there's no ability for uh, for a person, mad or otherwise, to even get up and say, I had a conversation, with another woman. There was nothing to it, uh, but I'm still being punished because I had a one-on-one conversation over social media with another woman. Now, I don't want to say that that's what happened, but even as you said in the beginning, even if that's the only thing that ever happened, that still in that theology would have warranted a really huge reprimand. So there's no
Yeah, yeah, and I think
there's
hopefully
such,
he.
there's such a dysfunctional um, relationship between the sexes in some of our theologies. So highly complementarian, so highly role based, idolizing marriage above singleness, idolizing family above uh, just a couple without children. There's so much idolization and dysfunction, I think, in relationships in our theologies that it necessarily leads to greater and greater and greater dysfunction, not just for pastors but for everybody.
Yeah, think I think we I read today somebody tweeted, um you may retweeted it, just this idea Jesus didn't command me to love my religion, he commanded me to love my neighbor. So if what my religion says gets in the way of me loving my neighbor, then maybe that's not good religion, at least Christianity religion. And I think this plays here too, is like the attitude that some theologies have towards women is not very loving to our women neighbors or even those in our own household. And I think here it should not be lost on us that like likely this woman is, or women are going to be suffering and dealing with a lot more shame and guilt eventually. Let's be honest, no matter what comes out, after through all this. Matt Chandler is going to land on his feet somewhere, and he's going to be fine, and he's going to move on. And so then a lot of times, what's left in the wake is these women dealing with whatever happened, and they're not fine. They can't move on, and our
They didn't get a
theologies,
standing ovation.
yeah, our theologies ignore them, and I think that's a shame, and shouldn't be lost on us here. So, but I think eventually Matt will come if he goes through a process. If he does submit to a process, I think eventually he'll come to be honest with himself and not fear whatever the repercussions are, and be honest with whoever he needs to be honest with, because he's definitely not right now. You can just see that, which is why they shouldn't have let him speak. So, um, yeah. So we'll see what happens. I'm sure we'll get more detail in the coming days. I think it's helpful for us too to have these things, to ask these questions. You know, in our own worlds, like how are we going to handle something like this? How are we going to deal with the Billy Graham rule? How are we going to deal with um, those dynamics? What is our theology is dictating? Jesus had female friends that he spent time with. So I think
Alone.
yes, I think if Jesus is our model, we should look to him for how to have those appropriate platonic relationships in the church. My fax machine's going off. So, should we shift gears?
They still make fax machines?
What?
They still make fax machines?
Yeah, we have one. I don't know why it doesn't stop ringing. Not answering. This thing. All right.
Just deal with that, right?
Oh, yeah. It's not going to stop.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Chandler kind of shifted the focus from the government's debt forgiveness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess Biden and his team got a got a welcome reprieve from the evangelical community because of Matt Chandler, but people were just as exercised, if not more exercised, about their money going to pay for somebody else's debt this week, right?
Yeah, I found it fascinating. So to me, I made a post on Facebook asking a question: are Christians really upset about debt forgiveness? And
yes, they are.
Yeah,
from what I saw in the responses, it is a very clear and unequivocal yes. They are. We are. Why are we mad at debt forgiveness? I mean, because we are. We're we Christians. Many of us are mad as hell. Like what? What?
I was in shock. I was in shock. I saw some posts from some pastor friends about the debt forgiveness thing, and I thought, are people really upset about this? Is this like the Starbucks red cup thing? Remember the Starbucks red cup?
Happy holidays, man.
But really, no one was really mad about it. It was just kind of everybody was upset that everybody was mad, but no one was actually mad. I thought it might have been one of those things, but clearly not. Clearly, I think I'm probably in the minority. Still have my toe in the water evangelicalism on seeing that as a good thing to forgive debt. I think.
Well, yeah, and I just we know that Republicans and Democrats just disagree to be disagreeable. Even if they agree, they're going to find a reason to disagree, and a lot of people just are going to disagree with this debt forgiveness simply because it's a political thing. Either the economics of it, or the timing of it, or who's receiving it, or the amount of it. So you've got all of this like non-theological reasons for disliking this particular debt forgiveness. But what shocked me about it was whenever people began to make the leap in logic to Jesus would not want us to be for debt forgiveness, and not just this particular debt forgiveness, but debt forgiveness in general. And so at that point, I'm like, are you listening to yourself? Do you even understand what the Bible teaches, or do you just not care? Or do I not understand what the Bible teaches?
I know. I
Maybe
thought
I'm
for a minute.
wrong.
I thought for a minute maybe I didn't know what I was reading to be true. Yeah, I think people. Yeah, as I look through the thread, the number one argument against my question, I guess, everybody just assumed I believed in debt forgiveness by my question, but I was all political in nature. The responses were all like, well, do we forgive all debt? And then it was, you know, basically Republican talking points, and and I was just fascinated by that. I was like, so we'd rather go to our Republican talking points over and above the scriptures and not really deal with the scriptures. And so this morning the thread's still alive and well. So if you're watching this, it's probably still going in my feed, and
Uh,
you can jump
I
in.
had to I had to tap out for a while.
But this morning, a lady was like, "Are you for like helping the homeless and paying off people's mortgages and their defaulted car loans?" And I'm saying, like, well, yeah, like,
Yeah, I am.
yeah. And I give my money to that, and we give our money from the church here for stuff like that. And yeah, I'm all for it. I mean, I think that's what Jesus has called us to do. I think it's pretty clear in the scriptures that we're called to do that. I think so. As I've really dialogued about this, if I could boil it down, I was trying to really figure out like what is going on here. And I think at the heart of it all, like to simplify it, is we have a view of the gospel that I think is disjointed. We don't have like a holistic view of the gospel. When I say the gospel, I mean what Jesus did for us and what He's called us to do, and kind of His life. So
Yeah, I mean, well, growing up, the gospel
yeah,
for me was, pray a prayer, accept Jesus into your heart, believe in the death, burial, and resurrection, and that was the gospel. The gospel was assent, was belief in a very narrow but clear and defined doctrine. That was the gospel. The gospel being a word for good news. That was it, and that was the gospel.
yeah,
Anytime anybody used that word.
yeah. That's the God. I mean, I think that's the gospel a lot of us grew up with. I think that's the simple way to do it. It's like, so there's this one side of the gospel that's like our get out of hell free card. Like we pray the prayer, we do the thing, and we're good to go.
I said,
And
you're
that's
done.
it.
I've done the gospel.
I've done it. Right. And then how I live my life and how I interact in the world, that's going to be dictated to me in other ways from other sources, like our
Yeah, that's not
political.
the gospel, right? That's good works,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
are Catholic.
That's very Catholic. Right.
Yeah,
Um,
they can't do. Yeah, well, and I think that there was a fear that I saw of debt forgiveness being seen as good works, and by saying that not believing in debt forgiveness of any kind was equal to the gospel. A lot of people, I think, like you say, we're offended doctrinally and theologically in calling an action or a practice like forgiveness of debt as being the gospel.
yeah. Well, so I like Matthew Bates. I don't know if you read his book on the gospel. He's written like three now, but his original one was called Salvation by Allegiance Alone, and then he wrote a book. I forget gospel something, but Matthew Bates. He has three books in
Matthew
the
Bates,
gospel,
got it.
and but he talks about the gospel proper. So the gospel proper, the way he breaks it down, is essentially the Apostles' Creed. Um, what what Jesus did here on earth to save us from our sins, right? And then there's the gospel purpose, which is how we're called to live our lives, which you could really open up Paul's letters, uh, and Paul constantly has this rhythm of gospel, the gospel power, and then the gospel purpose, right? He'll share the gospel power, and then he'll share what that looks like for your life. And so I think we've lost as a church, broader church community, this ability to see that the gospel not only has the power to save us, but also it saves us for a purpose, to live our lives. Jesus, he launched a revolution here on earth of how to live differently. That, like, he didn't get murdered because he was preaching salvation from your sins. He was getting murdered because he was starting a new way of living, a new world order, a new politic, that was different than what the Israelites and the people of those time were currently living under. And so the Gospels are filled with it, of what Jesus did and how he lived his life. I mean, we see it all over the place. So I think that's important to understand. And so where we get skewed too is, I think the resistance. We just look at the gospel purpose, then it does become like a works-based salvation. As we just, if I just do these set of things and I'm saved, then I'm good to go. Which some people like throw on the Catholics, but I don't think it's just Catholics. I think it could be any. I've seen it in all sorts of denominations, right? That could get skewed too. But if you're just focused on the gospel power, then all of a sudden you're going to be influenced by so many other outside sources for how to live your life, and you're not going to use Jesus as your lens for how to live your life and how to politic in the world, to set up and establish a way of living. And so I think it's important to hold both in balance. Like our professor used to talk about two sides of the same coin, right? And so I think these are two sides of the same coin of the gospel. We have the power to save, and then the purpose, which we're called to live.
So you end up having fundamentalists on each side. You have fundamentalists who only it's the power and the theology of it, and you've got fundamentalists on the other side who's only the justice, it's only the good works, who don't have the other. But really, where the good news is where those two things meet.
Yes. Yes. I mean, what is the point of the gospel if it's not good news for me today?
That's a get out of hell free card, right?
But how does that affect
then
me
and there,
today?
Sweet Beulah land on the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that what Jesus taught, though? I mean, whenever you really read what Jesus taught and you take into account the things that he said about life after and life in the here and now, the theology, everything, almost everything, if not everything that Jesus taught, was about the kingdom now, the kingdom in the present, and how that impacts. And the parables that he told were always about God's heart and ideals and values being lived out in the here and now, and how that radically changed outcomes, not just in the present, but radically changed outcomes in the future. It's like, growing up, radically changed their outcome in the future by getting them out of, hell, and whatever happens today doesn't matter because it's all about them. But, Jesus seemed to teach radically change their world now using my values, and that will have an impact as well on the power of the gospel, their heart, in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
So you're telling me I have to forgive?
Yeah, forgive, and I think too is like our culture is so focused on like the future, and one day I'll be in heaven and I don't want to be in hell, and Jesus really wasn't talking about that. Like the Israelite people didn't have that concept like we do today, and so everything in theology for them was about the here and the now. And Jesus was like telling them, you're forgiven. So you don't have to, like, I'm doing the things that you thought you had to do. Like, I am being the sacrifice. I'm taking upon myself the sin. You no longer have, I'm the last Paschal lamb. You no longer have to go to temple to slaughter a lamb, because I am being the lamb that's going to be slaughtered. So you are now free to live your life, to live in these ways. And so the forgiveness of sins was a freedom. The weight's off our shoulders. I no longer have to sulk and do all of these things, these rituals, because Christ has done them for me. And now I can live freely into this new world order and love people, forgive people, pay their debt. I mean, the Acts 2 church provided for everyone who had need. People were selling their property to financially cover debts, right? Ananias and Sapphira were struck down and killed because they lied about how much money they had that was supposed to go to paying off debts, right? And so these things got transferred to the entire community. The entire community took on, like, that was a comment that I saw a lot, was like, are you willing to take on other people's debts? Well, yeah, that's what we're called to do. I don't get that. I don't, like, it's right there. Yeah, right there.
There it is. Yeah, yeah. Shared everything that they had. They sold their possessions and shared the money with those in need. I don't see how we have lost the story so much that we cannot see how forgiveness of debt and taking on even ourselves a portion of that forgiveness of debt isn't a microcosm of the greater forgiveness that God provides. I mean, I'm just thinking of all of the unchurched and unbelieving people who follow my wall are reading Christians saying, I don't want to be a part of helping in any way sacrifice for you to have it easier economically, and not think that people aren't going to want anything to do with your faith or your salvation. I don't want your Bible or your God if you don't want me to not suffer in some way. You know, how much of your paycheck are you going to give? Yeah, how much of my paycheck is mine anyway? The Bible teaches that 100% of everything you have is God's. None of it's mine. None of it's yours. If you believe, if you truly believe in God. But the problem is, I don't think we believe in the God of our imagining, the God whom we want to exist, not the God who is in black and white on the pages of Scripture.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole rich young ruler story, right? I think that's a parable for America.
Don't sell everything.
The American evangelical. Yeah, like, it's mine. I earned it. Why do I have to give it all up? I think, yeah, there's this. We put the American ideal, the American dream, over and above Jesus's dream, Jesus's kingdom, Jesus's calling.
I don't understand the difference between the two.
You know, because this is a very pull myself up by my bootstraps mentality, which is completely anti-Jesus. Jesus was not pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. In fact, he tells the disciples to not bring anything with them and let other people pay for you, right? Just carry your knapsack and people will provide for you. Like, Jesus wasn't like, no, you got to go earn it all yourself, and you got to, you know, do it yourself. So that ideal, I think, is at the core here with this argument is, well, I pulled myself up my bootstraps, but so everybody else has got to do it too. But what happens when you're pulling your bootstraps and your bootstraps break? You can't put your shoes on, and you know, and you know, you can take that metaphor a lot of different places. And so I think as Christians, we're not being very loving. I will say that. I think this attitude of not.
I agree. Forgiving, like, if you can't keep your mouth shut, if you believe that, better to keep your mouth shut than to open it and be thought a fool.
Yeah. And if you look at it practically, it's 10 grand. Come on. Like for most of us with student loan debt, that doesn't make much of a hill of a difference. And so, it's interesting. Like what if it was the 50 grand that people were throwing out there, like, or just completely forgiving all of it? I mean, you want to dive into that, the hypocrisy of, well, Trump forgave the PPE loans, right? And so that was okay. But now that Biden is forgiving some loans, even less than what Trump forgave, that's not okay. And
Yeah,
you look
well,
at
that was
that.
my point. If a different president had or a different party had done this, would your opinion have changed? And most people would say no, but they're lying. They're lying. Their opinion would have totally changed.
Oh
I
yeah,
I I just Matt, I this could have been a win for the church, theologically and practically. This could have been a win for church people to have stood up and said, whenever this happened, it's not enough. For people are in greater debt. Let's go more. Let's do further. What can we do? We know that we're going to have to give a few cents, out of our income, maybe towards this. I don't even know if anything will, but this could have been an opportunity for the church to have stood up and said, wow, we are a people whose entire theology is based on forgiveness. Even if you don't believe that debt forgiveness or transference or any of that, no matter what you believe about forgiveness of debt, you believe in forgiveness of sins. And for people whose entire theology is built on the idea of forgiveness, to be able to stand up and say, hey, we're built on forgiveness. This is really cool that forgiveness is happening to you. uh, and just stop.
yeah,
No matter what, but just shut up after that. This
yeah,
is really cool that some forgiveness is happening for you. And you know what? God would have smiled.
yeah.
People would have smiled, but instead, yeah, we're
I
we've lost the story. We've
we have,
lost the story.
and we've
You
lost
know,
we've lost our ability to be a good witness in the world. People see it, people that aren't even in the church, or Christians, if you will, know the story of forgiveness, and they see this and they're like, that doesn't line up, that doesn't jive. And so it's interesting that people outside the church, I've seen, call the church to task. And I think the more we dive in our roots into a political system like the republicanism, which seems to be where most evangelicals are and will continue to be, the more we're going to lose our Christian witness, because the more you're going to be manipulated to change your Christian values for the party platform, which has been their whole goal from the start. If you look at it historically, the whole goal was to unify. The evangelical church used to not be unified in one party. There was Democratic evangelicals, and it was pretty split 50-50. And then the Republican Party realized that that was bad politically. So let's unify the evangelical base and use them to vote. And so over time, they've just continued to lead the evangelicals to vote for their party platform. And it's sad, and it hurts. It hurts the church
it
as we
does.
move in the world.
Well, when the unchurched world is looking at the church and its actions and saying, "What the hell is wrong with you?" It should be a wake up call to say, are we really who we're supposed to be?
Yeah, it's um, it's sad and disheartening, but I think our job. I know you have presence online. I have a presence here in my local community, is to help just kind of lead people to Christ and what He's called us to do. I think kind of figuring out how to help people recenter their lives around Jesus, even in the way in which they live in the world and operate in the world, beyond just a salvation of from hell kind of thing. Um, it's important that we enter into these discussions. I know we talked about it last time, but like I think I think pastors and leaders need to step up and start having discussions, even though it can be fearful and cause anxiety when people disagree with you and all of those things. We
Yeah,
felt that.
pastors and people of faith have to not remain silent in the face of all this jacked theology. Um, it's Jesus said, "My words, my teachings will be divisive. They'll divide families. They'll divide brother against brother." Um, that doesn't mean that we want to be divisive, but whenever you begin following and speaking and thinking and acting like Jesus did, you're going to you're going to create some clear division among people. And interestingly, the
Yeah,
people who you're going to be divided against aren't usually the unchurched. It's going to be the people who are deeply churched and baptized in a theological system and belief and practice system that is not of Christ.
yeah, and you don't have to be perfect at it. You're going to make mistakes. You are going to have moments that you regret, but I think the more you interact, the more you get out there and all the platforms, the more you learn how to just interact better. And so there's only one way to start. Just start and lead. I think you have to be online. I know there's folks that were like, I can't. That's impersonal. No, but that's where the world lives right now. And so I think
Yeah,
that's a big missing piece.
it's pastoral malpractice to
Yeah.
not be online and to not be in the conversation. How you do it, I think, is where the differences come in. But you can't be absent. You can't hide behind the pulpit for an hour on Sunday and really believe that you're pastoring people or that you're leading.
Exactly. Because let's be honest, most now the average of church attendance is probably once a month, 12 times a
At
year.
best, the most committed people are once every 4 to 6 weeks.
And you think that, them watching Tucker Carlson every night, you're gonna compete with that? No. You
No,
gotta go where they're at. You gotta go where they're at, and you gotta be online. You gotta That's why we're trying this sort of thing, and just gotta do it. So,
it's been a busy week.
it's been a lot, but we covered a lot today. It's pretty good. So,
All right. Well,
yeah.
until next week.
Thanks for watching.